Let's start with the starting area. Get this into scene. Let's go ahead and add a point light, game object, light, point light, and I'm going to bring this one up a little bit and increase its radius by a fair amount. Oop. Make sure that it's actually in the proper location. There we go. I was wondering why we weren't seeing any lighting information. So I'm going to increase the, actually at this point I'm going to decrease the radius a little bit. And I'm going to set this color to a blue that's a little bit reminiscent of the color of our fog. So it's kind of a lightish blue. Let's bring it over here. Let's zoom in a little bit. And let's bring this a little bit back. Play with the radius a little bit. Let's bounce over to the game mode. And we can see how this is adding a little bit more visual interest and color mixing to our platform. If we wanted to give the impression that perhaps this was the start of the cave system and maybe we're seeing a little bit of light from the outside world coming in, we could add in shadows to this light. So let's see what that looks like. And that really does give a cool effect. This gives us the feeling that the player is just starting his adventure and he's leaving the world outside. We could see his shadow cast maybe by some moonlight. I'm really happy with that, so I'm going to leave that as is. Let's go back to the scene view. And let's add a little bit of lighting information for the bridge. This looks like it's going to be a bit of a hazard, so we want to make sure that our player can clearly see it as they approach it. This will also allow us to add a little bit more lighting information to where our first enemy is. I'm going to create another point light. I'm going to rotate to make sure that it's actually in the location that we want it to be in. And this is kind of an ambient light source. So I'm keeping the radius large, but I'm going to decrease the intensity. Maybe even pull this up a little bit. I think around 0.4 is going to do it for us. Let's adjust that intensity a little bit further. We don't want it to overtake the other lighting that we have in our scene. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now we have something that will help our players see the start of this hazard. But it's not doing a ton for our enemy character. Let's do a little bit of experimenting. I'm going to add in a spotlight. And I'm going to place that over the enemy. I'm going to go to the top view to make things a little bit easier. And I'm just adjusting the intensity a little bit here because we don't want to have a super obvious ring of light. Go in and change the angle a little bit so it's pointing. Let's see how it'll work with shadows, because if this is the start of the cave system, we might still be receiving some shadows from the entrance. I'm going to rotate this a little bit more. And I'm just adjusting the rotation here in the transform value. Let's increase the spot angle a little bit. And there we go. I'm fairly happy with that. So I've adjusted the angle of this spotlight so it's pointing down at our enemy character, casting a little bit of a shadow. Let's go back over to the game view here. And overall just lighting it more evenly so the player can see it. Let's go ahead and try adjusting the color so it matches the same color as our point light. And that's pretty close. If we want to be exact, what we could do is select our point light, click on the color, and then set it as a preset. You can see that down here at the bottom there's a preset section, and there's actually already a little color swatch. All we need to do is click on it, and that will save that swatch. And now we can go back to our spotlight, click on the color, and select that same swatch. There we go. Now, all that being said, I think we should brighten it up a bit. Maybe we want it to be actually a little bit closer to the firelight. And actually, I like that much better. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this light and apply it to our other two enemies. Because these enemies are still within the range of the firelight, we can keep the same coloring and it'll just work. Going to adjust the angle a little bit so it works better for this specific enemy. Increase the range a bit, and actually let's see if we can get away with using one light for both enemies. Let's see how that looks in game. I think that looks pretty great. Now let's go ahead and tackle the area with the chest. I'm going to create another spotlight for this. And pull this up here. And I'm going to set this to kind of a blue to match with our starting light. Maybe the idea here is that there's a hole in the cave ceiling that's allowing a column of light to pass through and shine down on this treasure chest. I'm going to move the main camera closer to this side of the scene. It's going to pop into where the dwarf hero is when we play the game, so it's not a problem to be doing this. Not a bad start, but I feel like the edging on this spotlight is a little bit too strong. So let's see if a cookie can help us out here. I'm going to scroll down until I see the second cloud alpha here. And that actually helps break up the shape of our spotlight, so I think that's really good. I'm going to bring the spotlight down a little bit. Increase the radius. Maybe the intensity just a tiny bit. We don't want it too obvious. And I think that's looking pretty good. So now let's add some lighting information to the door as well. I'm going to duplicate this spotlight. And I'm just going to see if I can give a little bit of visual interest to the doorway without interrupting our enemy lights. And there we go. By setting this light to around 0.75, 0.76, and turning on shadows, it adds a little bit of dimension to the light without being too overbearing. If I toggle this off, we could see that it was a little bit flat before, and now it's slightly more dynamic. This looks like a great starting point for our light blockout. So in our next clip, we're going to go and experiment a little bit with a post-processing stack before coming back and finalizing all of our lighting.